Hello Rebel Divas, welcome to my Writer's Den. I'm going to share with you a story from my book, The Accidental Traveler. Now, I think I mentioned earlier, the stories in the book, The Accidental Traveler, are based loosely on many of the experiences I've had traveling to different parts and living in different parts of the world. And if it may come across that I was a jet-setting traveler, it was totally the opposite. I traveled and moved because I had to, because I had no choice. I had to leave a country or follow a family member or find a job or find a school. You know, sometimes I think when you go through some adversity in life, they make for good storytelling later on, which is what I'm trying to do. So today the story I have for you is called Tipping in Seoul, and this is episode number 3. Now there are 4 episodes to this story, so just to make it palatable for people to watch, so you're not listening for me forever. The first 2 episodes are up, so take a look at them, read them, view them before you listen to this episode, which is the 3rd episode of Tipping in Seoul. Are you ready for a story? Alright, let's start. Gwen, my Taiwanese girlfriend, she took the menu and she pointed at that vegetable bowl, which we thought was a vegetable bowl, again, that line on the menu, and said this is what we wanted. But the 2 men in the restaurant and the woman, the restaurateur, they stood there shaking their heads at us, and they kept saying no good, only for Koreans. I looked at Gwen puzzled. Why would they not serve the same food to us? It's a little strange, isn't it? It's as if I'd ordered. And then I'd remembered what my guidebook had said earlier, that in small little out-of-the-way restaurants, especially if you're out of Seoul, but sometimes even within the big city, you could find some restaurants that might serve a dish which might come from the same species as Lucy, the Pomeranian dog puppy that Gwen owns. So I looked at Gwen, her face went a little white, and so she realized it at the same time as I did. I whispered to her, Gwen, did we just order dog soup? Gwen grabbed the translation book from me. She banged her fist on the table and she said, vegetarian! And she pointed at me and she pointed at her and she said, vegetarian, in English and then in Korean. Somehow or the other, everybody seemed to understand. The woman gave a sigh. One of the men gave us a thumbs up, and the woman turned around abruptly and walked into her kitchen with a determined look on her face. I just hoped everybody understood what we had ordered and where we were going with this. We tried to strike up a conversation with the 2 men and try to probe a little bit and ask questions, but their English was just as bad as our Korean. So in the end, when they had finished their meal, they had to get back to work, I presumed. So with friendly waves, they left, and we all smiled and nodded, but that was about it. When they were gone, I turned to Gwen and I said, we can't be talking like this. We can't be spending an entire week in Korean like bumbling tourists. She said, I've got to bookmark this page, the translation page, and then we bowed our heads over our guidebook and our translation page, and we tried to write down all the names of the foods that we knew we would eat, and also the places we want to go to. So we were sitting there and planning the 2nd week of our trip in Korea. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, we could hear the restaurateur, the woman with the green scarf and the gap in her tooth. She was banging pots and pans and cooking up a storm. Whatever she was making, it smelled heavenly. Within 15 minutes, she brought 3 steaming, oversized bowls to our table. Gwen and I looked at it very carefully. We wanted to make sure. The first dish was a spicy red stew with tofu, zucchini, shiitake mushrooms, and that ubiquitous Korean rice cake that we found everywhere we went. It was all mixed into a delicious smelling broth. We passed the first bowl. The second bowl was filled with stir-fried vegetables that were easy to see, broccoli and peas and things like that, with thick, chewy noodles smothered in a greasy black bean sauce. Second bowl, we gave it a thumbs up. The third was a bowl of white rice sprinkled with black mustard seeds and green onions that everybody, every time that they serve every time with every meal. The food was large enough to feed an army, and everything smelled delicious, and they passed the test, fully vegetarian. And I was sure I'd devour it in a few seconds, but there were no utensils. So we looked at the woman, muttering to herself. She returned to the kitchen, and she came back with a pair of chopsticks for Gwen, my Taiwanese girlfriend, and a spoon for me. Gwen tried to hide a smile, but I saw it. I pointed at the chopsticks and I turned to the woman, and I spoke in English. I said, "I can use those too. For me too." The woman merely shook her head and walked away. And she went back to her counter to shell her peas. Now we were just finishing the first bowl of the food when she came back with a plate filled with kimchi, the pungent, addictive, must-have side dish with any Korean food. That was so amazing. The kimchi in Korean is not like any kimchi outside of Korea, I can tell you that. She slid it on the table and she said something in Korean. Now our mouths were full, so we nodded our head and we just said our usual 감사합니다, which seemed to get us out of trouble many times. And Gwen said 맛있다, 맛있다, delicious in Korean. But it didn't seem like that was what the woman wanted to talk about. She kept talking to us. She pointed outside the window, and then she gestured and she contorted her facial expressions. She was trying to tell us something, and we really didn't understand. We watched her carefully, trying to guess what it was. And then she just gave a shrug and a toothless smile, and she walked out of the restaurant. Before we knew what was going on, the door shut closed behind her, and we heard a key turn in the lock. Gwen and I sat speechless for a few seconds. We were alone in the restaurant. There was nobody around. We had a bowls full of food in front of us, and the restaurateur had just left, locking us in. "Hey!" I cried out. Gwen pushed back a chair and ran to the door and pulled the doorknob. It didn't budge. We were locked. And then we rushed to the window, and we saw the woman's back disappearing around the street corner. I think I'm going to stop there. Stay tuned next week to find out how we got out in the final episode of Tipping in Seoul.